Hello. Hello everybody, hope you can hear me. This stream is brought to you by the 1937 Spithead Naval Review, images appearing on screen now. Assuming of course that everyone can actually hear me. Awesome, that's good to know. Yes, so as you'll discover in the dry dock this weekend in a little bit more detail, these images are amongst various images that I've been acquiring and saving for publishing in the public domain. So that will hopefully be some good news for people. Now, sorry if you excuse my voice, it's been a bit of a rough week. Today, before we get into the answering of questions and such like, which we will do in due time, we're going to have another look at Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. The reason for that will become clear in due course. So, let's switch over to Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. There has been a few bits, pieces, new patches and such, and so in a similar vein to what we did last time, we're just going to have a quick look through a few scenarios and see if these new scenarios are offering us the ability to build something vaguely in line with historical norms. So this mission is called Rise of the Heavy Cruiser, and I'm going to try and see if we can come up with a cruiser design that vaguely matches the USS New Orleans. I think this time we're going to try. I wonder if we can change nation this time. Oh, Huntington will probably USA Navy anyway. Right, well, as I say, this is just going to be an approximation, so let's put that on there. That's probably going to be the wrong place for it, but whatever. So let's set our displacement first. So the New Orleans class is a treaty cruiser, so down we go. No, you can't actually drop down to treaty era heavy cruiser design. Oh wait, that's interesting. Okay, well let's try to go up to 12,005. So that's its maximum loaded displacement. Yeah, that main tower's not going to work, is it? Okay, let's try this one instead. Okay, so on the New Orleans class, this should be on the fantail here, not up here. So that's one thing. Let's see if we can at least get the two funnels in. Stash funnel. That much we can get in, which is good. Looks like we've got a barbette preset for us there, so 8-inch triples. So this is sorry, I don't know what's happened to my voice recently. Anyway, let's see. So this is where the rear superstructure should be for a New Orleans class, but let's pretend it's there and put our final triple turret back there where it ostensibly should be. So, what else have we got to put in? Well, we've got to aim for a speed of 33 knots. That's going to... Oh, no, we're overweight already. Let's see if we drop our range down, can we save ourselves a bit? No. Well, we're going for a very light build at this rate. So we've got our 9 guns. Now we need 5-inch twins. Well, that's good. Well, machine guns. Well, let's add a few of these to simulate machine guns. 2, 6, 8. And let's check out... Alright, well, there's all this lot to sort out in a minute, but no torpedo tubes, as we are, in fact, the US Navy. Ah, now this is where we might save some displacement. Nope, I'm going the other way. 5-inch belt. It's an all or nothing, so deck is 2.2. Alright, deck is 1.25 at the extensions. Let's go with 1. Conning tower is 5 inches. Our turret armour is 8 inches. Because apparently, as Americans, we like our gun crews to live. I'm going to ignore the secondary bit for the minute. And the turret's 1.5 at the top. Got a few 100 tons to spare. So what else can we do? Obviously we're probably going to be using the latest prop armour. Well, that's kicked off on a bunch of our displacement. That's good. It's probably going to go up now. Geared turbines, oil fuel, balance boilers, auxiliary power plant. Good bets. Decent anti-torpedo protection, bottom, some reinforced bulkheads, some anti-flood, good citadel, heavy shells. Let's go with high TNT. Hydraulic turrets, advanced hydraulic turrets. Let's get some enhanced reloading on there. Best rangefinder. Some radar, some RDF. Now look, we've still got... We can bring our bulkheads up a little bit and put our range up a little bit. So there we go. Obviously it doesn't look quite like a New Orleans class, but it is roughly armed the same as a New Orleans class, and it is armoured and generally equipped like a New Orleans class. So, unlike the Dreadnoughts, we've managed to we've had to use the higher band, the actual loaded weight. But that's not a terrible simulacrum, as it were. So that's that. What else have we got? I'm just going to pop back over so I can see what's going on with the stream. Yeah, they have disabled the incidentally apparently they've disabled Control Shift A to unlock everything, but you can do a limited unlock of everything for a specific nation in the custom battle section. So I was testing that before the live stream, but unfortunately I tried it twice and it crashed twice, so I decided we won't do that. Create a battleship of the 1940s based on the Iowa class and send it into combat with a not Yamato. Oh boy, yeah, that'll be a controversial one to stream. Yeah, they've introduced some new scenarios, these slightly newer ones. So let's go with this one. Let's try and build a destroyer, shall we? Destroyer 1, so by this whole form we're probably looking at an early war destroyer. So let's... what should we do? Should we try and build a Clemson class? I think we should try and build a Clemson class. So what can we do? So we've got our hull. We're going to need lots of funnels, which is always a good thing. So there's our... I mean, obviously this isn't flush deck, as the historical Clemsons were, but whatever. Actually, I think I'm going to try and put that there. And you'll see why in a minute. So, straight funnels. 1, 2. Get the spacing. Little Clemson. So what are we looking at displacement wise? Well, we've got 1200 ton normal displacement, so let's see if we get a... we can't take the weight up. That's irritating. Well, we'll keep going, and yeah, the ship will be overweight, but we know what we were trying to do. I wonder why that's locked in. Maybe it's something to do with the mission. And you can have different designs for the mission. That's a useful feature. Right, well, let's go back to our weirdly displacement locked vessel. We're going to go with turbines. We're going to go with fuel. We don't have armor, but whatever. Okay, so auxiliary power plants. Okay, so that's all that lot. So we've got our funnels. We don't need barbettes. 5-inch guns. We might have to put our speed up a bit. No, 35 knots. Can we go 35.5? Yes, we can. Oh, look, and our displacement's is still locked to 900 tons. Whatever. As I said, we will make do. No, 4-inch guns. Sorry, what am I talking about? I'm so used to US destroyers being having 5-inch guns. And we've got our 1 fore and aft. Don't forget we've also got to have a 3-inch anti-aircraft gun at some point. So I wonder if we can actually find some space. Let's see, where can we put a 4-inch gun? There we go. Right, so we have our 4 4-inch guns. Let's get there's our 3-inch anti-aircraft gun. And now the torpedo launchers, and this is going to be the fun thing, isn't it? Ignore the armour, it basically doesn't mean anything. We're supposed to have triples, but oh well. Yeah, I have a feeling we're not going to be able to get them on because of that displacement limitation. Nope. Nope. Oh well. Why is that? Oh, hello. Now we might. Well, displacement's gone. What? I don't know what's going on with that. Never mind. I'm not arguing. So we can't get triples, but we've got to somehow fit 12 launchers on. That didn't go well. well, we've got 4. Well, with our new length, let's reallocate some of this. Let's go so those funnels back on. 12. And our 3-inch AA gun. Now let's go make sure we've got a 4-inch gun on first. Randomly stick it on the back there. Okay, so it looks nothing like a Clemson, and we don't have the triples, but we do have something that's actually a little bit lighter than a historic Clemson. And we have our 4 4-inch guns, we have our 12 torpedo launchers, we have our 4 funnels, and we have our little 3-inch anti-aircraft gun. And we even have our correct speed, so that's not actually half bad. Something went beep. I wonder what that was. Use R and T to rotate torpedoes and turrets to fit. That sounds like a good plan. And, well, somebody's saying... Yes, okay, the Dying Titan, if you want me to make a meme battleship with every feature I usually hate in a ship. Right. Okay, fine. Let's go a bit nuts, shall we? Oh, it's like they heard me coming. Right, well there's one feature I hate. What else should we have? Well, that's a monolithic monstrosity of ugliness at the back there. Oh, and okay, I see why they've done that. Right. Okay, well... okay, this should be funny. Let's go for 28 knots. We're going to make diesel. Let's just fill in all these bits, because, well, at this stage of the design process, it doesn't really make much odds. Super heavy shells, because I don't like those. Loads of ammunition, so it'll probably explode. Yeah, Cordite 2. Because that never went wrong. Automatic firing guns. Fast heavy caliber torpedoes, because everyone knows a battleship needs those. No. Let's not do that. We're going to go do something even worse than that. Let's do that. And then, let's go with, since this is a super battleship, okay, get rid of that. Let's go with strong Russian design. And now we need some pointlessly large secondaries. They can't fit. Oh dear, of course they can't. Do we have any casemates available? No. Can we go... Oh, can we do something even stupider? Yes. Let's go for an intermediate caliber. And let's go with singles. No, still won't fit. Oh no, we can fit some here. It's a pity this bow goes too far, starts to narrow too far forward, otherwise we could put in some Fushida design stuff at the front. Ah, yes. Are we sure this design hasn't been stolen from Rule the Waves 2? Very Japanese. Some parts are badly placed. Yes, all of them. We're supposed to put a funnel in there. Let's see if we can. Oh yes, we can. There we go. It is an abomination unto the Lord. Right. And of course we must have distributed belt armor in random, completely nonsensical... Oh no, we're going to have a displacement limit. A cost limit even. We cannot have a whole number. No, going over. There we go. There we go. There is, apart from giving this thing a tumble home, we have created a Japanese super gangut with side-mounted quadruple torpedo launchers, tiny funnels, and very likely the ability to make a grown man cry upon witnessing it. I don't even want to think about how terribly this thing would do in actual real life. So yes, there you go. There's a meme ship. Now add some tumble home to it, and I think we can call it a good one. You people are so terrible sometimes. Ryan Gradle asks, have you considered playing War Thunder's new PvP naval EC mode? It's only for large ships and takes place on maps the size of the English Channel. Matches last for hours and involve objectives like protecting convoys, taking ports, etc. I didn't actually know that was around. I'm not going to give it a go right this minute, but I'll certainly have a look into that. That sounds slightly better than the current meta. How about building the Averof? Oh, please. That would be a little bit torturous. Is there an armoured cruiser build mission? Let's have a look. Convoys, gun basics, torpedo basics, pre-dreadnought conflict, heavy cruiser. Let's see. Does this give us access to... oh, it gives us access to an armoured cruiser hull. You're not going to get any side secondaries and turrets on there. What happens if I ramp the displacement up? Not going to get any side secondaries on there either. See if Semi 3 can do it. Nope, still no secondary sides there. Oh, Armoured Cruiser 4. Let's see if we can... No, that's just casement build-outs. Okay, so Armoured Cruiser Hull 4 isn't going to work for us. Let's try this one. Semi-armoured 3, also no side mounts. That's a light cruiser, so new. Battle cruiser. Battle cruiser 1, well that's invincible, so nope. Defend your convoy. Let's try further up the line. Oh, Armoured Cruiser 5. Maybe. Yes. Oops. Oh. Okay. Okay, let's do a last build there with the Georgios Averof, or at least as close as what we can get to it. Right, okay, so what are the statistics for our armoured cruisers? 10,000 ton displacement, I mean that's going to be, then we're way over that already, so let's shrink it down. Okay, well that's still a lot heavier than it actually was, but never mind, that's the shortest we can get. So we want to get to 23.5 knots, well that's going to save us some weight. We'll worry about all this stuff later. Let's get the main aspects in. So we have, okay, main tower. Let's take a look at the Averof's picture. Tripod mast, swept backed bridge, yeah, that'll about do. Then we need to get ourselves 3 funnels, 2 of which are taller than the other one. Okay, well can we at least get 3 funnels in? Close enough for government work. Rear tower, let's just get basic. No, we need a tripod, that's not a tripod. No, let's get a basic tripod. Well, so far so good. And now let's go with the main guns. So they don't have the 9.2 inch, but 9 is about as close as we get, so... Two twin, well, not quite a 9.2 inch, but we'll go with it. So that's the centerline guns. Now side guns, we need twin 7.5s. Not in the right place, but we've got them in, which is a... I suppose that's a step. What else have we got? So we have 16 single 3-inch guns, and they're not going to be encasements. It'll be interesting trying to find space for 16 of the blasted things, but never mind. Single barrel. Yeah, we aren't getting that many in. Let's substitute in the 2-inch because we might get a few encasements there. Okay, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. You know, we might even pull this off. And since we can use 3-inch guns, we probably should. So we're on 12. 14. It's not going to go on, is it? Okay, let's try it. Let's see if we can get that down with 2-inch guns. I mean, it's again, 2-inch guns are a slight historical fudge, but 12, 14, 16. Wait, well, we've got the secondary battery of 16 guns. Well, tertiary battery of 16 guns. Then we've got 4 single 1.85, so we might as well go for more of these. Well, numerically at least we've got it. If nothing else. And then we need to get, this is obviously our original configuration Averoff, we need to get in 3 17-inch torpedo tubes. 2, 3. And now let's go and configure the other bits that matter. So, midships, 7.9-inch armour, and abreast at the end is 3.15 or 3.2, fine, whatever. Deck is 1.6. Deck extended, well, we'll leave it at that. Conning tower is 7.1. Turrets are 7.9. The secondaries are 6.9. And the turret tops, don't have that immediately to hand, but we'll go with 2. Right, so let's pick up on this lot. Coincidence rangefinder, stereoscopic, coincidence, I'll go in coincidence 2, radar. Sorry, that's not me with the bag. Compound steam expansion. Coal, natural, auxiliary power plant, turbo drive shaft, standard crop 1, I think, given the era. Yeah, 1907, so that's going to be crop 1 at the very least. Well, that's brought our weight down at least. No barbettes. Basic Citadel stuff. We're going to use cordites because we like going boom. That's all good. Right, okay, well, oh, we're 43 tons overweight. How irritating. Let's get rid of that. There we go. So it's not the Shannon, but there you go. A vague facsimile within an accurate displacement and almost accurate weight and armament of the Georgios Averoff. Again, well, with this, with these new hulls and everything that they're introducing in the new scenarios, I'm actually getting more and more impressed that you're able to recreate a whole load of historical shipping, and it's vaguely on point. I think with a little bit of tweaking we'd be able to recreate almost anything, but this is certainly a step forward, considering that last time we did this we could recreate the capital ships, but the cruisers we definitely couldn't. And so yeah, that's a bit of a good thing. Right, so that's about half an hour of that, and this is where, in true Professor Farnsworth voice, I can declare good news, everybody. Because, if I can find where this all went, there it is. Now where's that message series gone? Don't worry. Right, okay, so the good news for those of you who are watching is that after the first stream that we did, the makers of the game got in contact and they have offered free, let up. It is free, but that wasn't what I was trying to say. They have offered 5 free game keys for Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. So if you don't have the game, but you want to have the game, then just put in a nice happy mine in the chat, and in about 4 or 5 minutes I will select 5 random people from there to give away a free key to. And just to point this out, this isn't a sponsored thing or anything. I'm not getting any financial benefit from this whatsoever. They got in contact with me as a result of the last stream, and they said, hey, well, what can we do to help out? Do we want some... would I like some keys? And I said, yes, of course I'd like some keys, then I can give them away to people, which is what we're doing. Wow, that's a lot of mines. The mine will be ecstatic that mine is being repeated as a chant. I like that one. Wow, it's going to be difficult to pick 5 out of that many. Okay. Wow. Okay. Wow. Okay. I'm gonna. That's a lot of people. I have a feeling the messages per minute count on this stream might be about to break. Oh right. Okay. Well, in the interim, in the last few minutes, let's go and have a look at. Just bring a couple of the new features up. So. This will probably crash, but this is the new bit, the new custom battle bit, so you can choose who you want to be: Germans, Americans, Russians, Austro-Hungarians, Japanese, Spanish, if you really hate yourself at this era of warship development, Chinese, okay, well, someone's got to do it, I suppose, the British, the French, and back to the Germans again, and obviously the Italians parked there on the other side. You can select a year, going through by 5-year blocks or single-year blocks, and you can select a starting range. And then you can select the sides. You can random, clear, unlock, design ship. If you design a ship, you design one of the ships that you select. So you can obviously try and recreate a massive battle, small battle, whatever. And it's when you do the design ship thing that it crashes. So... So, for example, if I was going to... I'm probably going to regret this, aren't I? Yeah, actually, I'm not. Given how many shenanigans we had last time when something crashed, I'm not going to actually try this until we get a slightly better chance of it not dying midstream. But yes, so that's a second look at Ultimate Admiral Dreadnought. It's a relatively brief one. Say some of these new scenarios I'm quite approving of. You've got this it's a new experimental US battleship of the 1920s. Now that'd be an interesting one. Now I have put in a Q&A for the developers, so I'm waiting to hear back from them regarding those questions. I put in 10 questions, so I might as well tell you what the questions are, and then when we get the answers, I guess I'll be able to tell you the answers. So the questions I've asked so far are: will there be national guns being introduced? So things like the 9.2 inch, the 7.5 inch, the 13.5 inch, etc., and within the existing whole digit calibers, various barrel lengths. So you can have the short barrel 11-inch guns, or long barrel 11-inch guns, or even longer barrel 11-inch guns if you're Germans, and so on and so forth. Then my next question is, will there be historical scenarios with historical or custom designs? Well, I guess that's kind of been answered by the introduction of that custom battle section, although it'll be interesting if they can pre-program some historical designs in there as well. Get some drink. 3. Will you be my third question is, will they be introducing hulls capable of the more unusual historical layout, such as the G3, the Nelson with its all-forward armament, the Agincourt with its turret farms everywhere, etc. Then 4. Will you be able to set formations other than line ahead to start a battle with? Because that's just... that irritates me sometimes. 5. Do you have plans to change the torpedo damage system? For those of you who have played it, you probably get very frustrated with the torpedo boat mission, where you have the magical pre-dreadnought of torpedo absorption. 6, I think in the latest patch, on my 6th question was there the ability to tier secondary batteries on barbettes like the 1930s British battleships did with the 5.25-inch stepped turrets. And that seems to be the case with the new patch, so I might play around with that a little bit later. I've also asked, will there be the ability to put guns on top of gun turrets? So that's small secondaries like the Dreadnought, but also remember, if you're going to design an early USN pre-Dreadnought, you can't call it a complete design unless you've built at least one with a 7 or 8-inch twin sitting on top of a 12 or 13-inch twin. Also, will there be multiplayer, and will there be national traits that affect ships' technology? Again, I think that last question actually is somewhat addressed by, sorry, going the wrong way, by this custom battle scenario, which, so, for example, in 1910, let's take that down to be more sensible. No hulls for a torpedo boat in 1910. Ooh, fancy. So, for example, here, I've got the option for a Dreadnought hull, an armoured cruiser hull, semi-armoured cruiser, light cruiser, and I suppose I'd probably have a battle cruiser hull if I'd selected that. So that's a pretty big Dreadnought 1 hull. Suggesting name Hercules, so they're actually getting the names suggestions relatively good as well. Right, so with all that said and done, let me put that over there. Right, so as I say, as and when I get replies back from them, we shall see. Name your ship HMS Thunderchild. They don't have an option for ram bow yet, so I can't do that yet. Right, so let's go through this whole mine list. Jeez. For those of you who are lucky enough to win a key, the best thing to do is probably going to be to message me on Discord, and then we can sort something out. Oh yes, the joys of YouTube chat. I had forgotten. Come on. Now YouTube's, hang on, let me see. No. Sorry, I'm just fighting with the, YouTube chat to see if I can scroll far enough back to hit the top of the mine list. Technology, don't you love it? Okay, well, it's not letting me scroll back up to the top, which is not going to be fair for everybody who's put mine in. Does anyone know, if you go back and view a live stream, do you get a sort of a chat running in the sidebar if you choose? If someone can answer that for me, that would be useful, because if that is the case, then I'll have to just pick the winners a little bit later. Oh, good, okay, yeah. Okay, so what I'll do then is, from that massive list, don't worry, by the time we get, when this stream is over, once YouTube processes it, what I will do then instead is, once it processes it, so probably say tomorrow morning, I'll go through that massive list of mine, and then I will select the winners off of that, and I'll put those winners in a community post on the channel at some point on Saturday, and then you'll find out from there. Okay, sorry about that. That's limitations of YouTube. So with that said, shall we do some questions and answers? Let me switch over to... Nope. Yep. Let's switch back over to the Spithead at Naval Review 1937. And let's go over to some Q&A. Civis Hamburgum, yes. Once I've decided on the winners, I'll put it in the YouTube community chat, community section, and I'll also put it on Discord. No, it's the the stream isn't over. It's just the bit about with the Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts, because obviously we always do Q&A on here as well. So let's pull up a few of the dry dock questions. Am I supposed to be protesting in the streets of London now? No. Why would I go out and protest in the freezing cold? It's cold and wet out here, and I've got better things to do, like stay inside and play Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts and talk to you lot. I wonder why it's not shifted over to the slideshow yet. Should have done. Anyway, so on the stream for everyone, has it gone over to the slideshow of 1937 Spithead Naval Review images, or is it still showing Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts? The Dying Titan asks, would you consider doing a live stream where you review a viewer design ship of the week? Oh yeah, slideshow's working. Okay, fine. Cool. Awesome. Once again, YouTube fails to provide. Cool. Right, okay, that's good. Right, now I will pick up a... so to ask the question... answer the question about live stream where users' ships are reviewed... I guess I could do that. These live streams are a little bit ad hoc. Basically, is a matter of, do I have the time, and have I either finished the videos for the weekend, upcoming weekend, or have I just gotten fed up and need a break? It's usually one of the two on a Friday evening. Alan Guo asks, would the Alaskas have the same fate as the Iowas if they were kept around instead of being scrapped? You might have had one as a museum ship, but I have a feeling the Alaskas went to the scrapyard fairly quickly for fairly good reasons, and there's not really an awful lot that you can do to prevent that. If they kept them around, they would have just been scrapped at some point. Then sort of the next major review down the line. The other ships were a lot more useful, and they bought it. The Iowas were in a very unique situation of being big, powerful, and relatively unused. Okay, so let's go on with questions then. Intercity 125125, very nice. Fan of the Intercities, a man of culture. What is the chance of a ship in the modern era, 2019, like the joke ship in one of your videos? You mean the By Jove? I'm going to keep stum on that one, because there's a few ships that have been designed in the past 5 to 10 years that, if I put them in a joke video, you'd probably take it as a legitimate joke if you didn't know the actual design really existed. So, steering clear of that one. Puckman asks, will you discuss destroyers of countries not involved in the Second World War? Yes, I will at some point. I know there's a few on the list to discuss, but there's two strands of navies involved in World War II that I haven't discussed in any great detail yet that I do plan to, which is the navies of the smaller countries involved in the Second World War that weren't invaded. So you've got places like, say, Portugal and Sweden. We've talked about the Sverige class a bit, I guess. But yes, Portugal, Sweden, Finland, those kind of small countries that had their navies, they committed them to some sort of action or other, or were just peripherally involved in the Second World War, and but we haven't talked about them in any great detail yet. At some point they'll get a chat, and obviously also, despite it being a quote-unquote World War, there were some countries that just didn't get involved in World War II, or at least right up until the end. There was a whole bunch of countries who randomly declared war on Germany and Japan in 1945, I guess just to get in on the winning side. Loka asks, if you could take a vacation without needing to worry about rent and such, would you take the offer of being a sailor on a replica ship like the Gothenburg and sail with it to the Far East? It's a big if. It would depend on the ship. I don't know why, but I have a feeling as a result of being an engineer, I have a mild distrust of man-made objects of significant height and me being on them. So if the job involved climbing up the masts and running along the yard arms, I would probably back away slowly. But if it was some other form of replica, or they just said you don't have to go up on the mast, then yeah, I don't see why not. I'm not necessarily sure I'd want to go to the Far East particularly, but a general cruise would be quite nice. The Far East seems far too hot and full of mosquitoes, much like most of the tropics actually. It's even like when I go to Bolivia, I like to stay at the higher altitudes where mosquitoes and other biting insects die from the lack of oxygen, which is very, very empowering. Just a race thing. Question: in the Pacific War, what was the difference between light carriers and carrier escorts, and how effective were they at their respective roles? Right? This is actually a pretty good distinction to make, so well done for asking that question. The light carriers, they varied in size and dimensions, but generally the difference between a light carrier and a carrier escort is that the carrier escorts, or escort carriers, are small and slow. They're typically something like a Bogue class or something along those lines. They don't go particularly fast, they don't have to carry that many aircraft, they are very much designed for convoy escort support duties and similar, which is why you had Taffy 1, Taffy 2 and Taffy 3 supporting the landings. They weren't supposed to actually be fighting ships. Whereas light carriers like, say, the Independence class, or later on the Colossus and Majestic class, they were called light carriers. They were specifically light fleet carriers. They tended to be a little bit larger than the carrier escorts, although that was partly a function of just having so much more machinery, and they needed the machinery because they were designed to go about as fast as the fleet and the fleet carriers. So generally what you're looking at is that a light carrier, or more properly a light fleet carrier, will be sort of 28 knots plus, usually 30 knots plus, and so they can keep up with the fleet, and they'll generally have an air group of around 30 to 50 aircraft. Whereas escort carriers will be smaller, slower, typically 20 to 24 knots, so occasionally even slower than that, and they'll have an air group that's measured in maybe a dozen or two in general. How effective were they in their respective roles? Escort carriers were definitely, well, they were kind of the cheap and cheerful carrier. They were definitely very useful in convoy escort duties. having the ability to have anti-submarine warfare aircraft operating with your convoy the entire way across the Atlantic, and helping around troop transports, convoys and such in the Pacific was a huge benefit and significantly dropped off the effectiveness of submarines. Light fleet carriers, they didn't do a bad job, but compared to the effect of the escort carriers, their overall effect was not quite as pronounced. They were nice, quick and easy compared to the fleet carriers, and they just they did their job solidly and well, but they weren't a kind of a major shift in their particular theatre of operations, the way that the escort carriers helped with the anti-sub warfare. Marty Moose, did you see yesterday the Russian aircraft carrier caught fire? Yes. The Kunetsov, I believe, has definitely been cursed. It's had cranes fall on it, it's had breakdowns, and now somebody managed to get sparks into a bunker of some description and set it on fire. Apparently the fire is out now, and that apparently, this is according to reports, so take it that as you will, but apparently most of the smoke was stuff getting around the ventilation systems, which, if you have a fire and your ventilation systems are pumping acrid, toxic smoke around, I'd suggest this is possibly a design flaw. But apparently the ship itself wasn't some glowing hellfire inferno, although that also would come as no surprise to me at the moment, given how many accidents have happened to Kunetsov. So we shall see in the next few weeks, I suppose, just how far into the ship that fire actually went. Mr. Potato asks, is there any truth of an Iowa-class firing on a North Korean artillery battery and a nearby destroyer signalling temper temper? That is an account I've seen in a number of different books. So I'm tempted to say it's either true or at least was very widely reported. But I'd have to do a little bit more digging to be absolutely certain of what was going on with that. Hawkticus History Corner. I know it's a bit before your usual time period, but what are your thoughts on the Korean turtle ships? I think I've mentioned them a few times with Admiral Yi Shin. They're a very interesting take. They're sort of early armoured ships, I guess you could call them. The one mistake that a lot of people do make with them is that although they were a key component of Admiral Yi's fleet, and obviously they were around in that period, not all of his fleet were turtle ships. Even when he was down to sort of just over a dozen ships, the turtle ships never made up the entirety of the Korean fleet, but they were a small but powerful core of it. So I think they're pretty interesting ships. It's just a pity that most of what we know of them is either written descriptions or the pictorial references are very stylized. So I know there is a replica of one that's sort of probably something close to what they looked like, but it would be interesting to see if there was a wreck of one somewhere so that we could figure out exactly what they looked like. They were an absolutely hilarious thing to roll around with if you ever played Age of Empires 2: The Conqueror's expansion. Even if they did look a bit like a kind of malevolent armoured Noah's Ark in that game. Stupid Robot Fighting League says, I've heard horror stories of disease ripping through cruise ships. Yeah, and I've been on one that happened. Fortunately, I didn't catch it, but it was a little bit Lord of the Flies for a few days. Have you come across records of World War II ships with the same issue? Warships didn't tend usually to suffer quite that much from the same issues. Most diseases that come through cruise ships come from roughly three vectors. You've either got people who are badly ill, but hey, they paid for their damn trip and they're staying on that ship, so they come on board with some kind of virulent disease. Two, it can be, you can get rounds of infection, especially bad food poisoning and stuff from poorly cooked food and or food that's left out too long in the kitchen areas. And aboard warships, the galley chefs and such tend to be a little bit, and I say tend to be a little bit more stringent about food safety standards, and also the food tends to get served and eaten relatively quickly, so those two vectors tend to be out of there. And of course, with the first vector, the navies don't tend to send people with streaming colds and noroviruses on to serve on warships, and if someone is that badly ill, they tend to try and get them into quarantine and out of the way as fast as possible as well, specifically to avoid that happening. And the other thing is where you get that on cruise ships is sort of big communal rest areas and swimming pools and stuff, which for some reason large Olympic-sized communal swimming pools and lots of people using them are in somewhat short supply on a battleship, even if you can, as the eye was proved, occasionally make them out of a gun tub. So yeah, there are a few outbreaks of disease on various warships of the Second World War era, but nothing quite as common or quite as horrific, at least as far as I've been able to find in my incidental reading, as compared to a cruise ship full of 5,000 people suddenly going down with projectile vomiting norovirus, which fortunately that wasn't the ship I was on. My one was instead back when I was in high school, and ended up with about 700 to 800 out of the 1,200 school kids on board just curled up in their cabins weeping quietly to themselves. But then again, this was the late teens, part of high school, so that could have just been part of their natural emo phase, you never know. Wolfram O'Connor asks, what about an overview of naval bases, kind of in the vein of your 5 to 10 minute guides? I see what you did there. For example, Devonport, Portsmouth, Brest, etc. Could be done, but I think I'd have to do that as a special, because if there's a port that you can fit into a 5-minute potted history, it's probably not that interesting. It's probably, yes, there's a port, it built some ships, it's there, or maybe it's not there, and that's it. Whereas if you're going to talk about something like Portsmouth or Cherbourg, Toulon, Newport News even, a ship lasts 10, 20, maybe 40, 50 years if it's lucky, unless it becomes a museum ship. Even a relatively new dockyard or ship or naval base like Newport News has been around for centuries. The amount of history that would be present in something like that, or something like Portsmouth or Toulon, is going to be so deep that would have to require a Wednesday special. And that list is almost as long as the 5-minute guide list. The story of the Vasa galleon, Puckman asks. Yes, I'm going to do that when I get a chance to pop over to Sweden and film it. B-Boy 12003, if you had a chance to modernise Hood, what would you do? Well, that is the subject of a video I have scheduled for maybe February, March next year, where I'm going to go over Hood, hopefully how it was lost, although that depends on some graphics that need to be done, and also I'm going to go over the two schemes that were prepared for a modernised Hood. I'm also working on a 1 to 700 scale model of a modernised Hood, which I'm in the process of kit bashing out of a model of Renown, a model of Valiant, and a model of Hood, so hopefully that will all be there at the same time. River Funsies, did the turbines for the Tirpitz get recovered and used by Norway? No idea off the top of my head, but just off the top of my head, I would think probably not, for the very good reason that, well, Tirpitz kind of got blown up and capsized. Once all the heavy machinery, after the explosions, and once all the heavy machinery had stopped falling around inside the engine rooms of Tirpitz, I would rather suspect those turbines would be more than a little the worse for wear. And then there's the seawater, and then eventually when you manage to scrap it, I can't imagine them being in anything like usable condition. Iklam, thank you very much. He sends a very nice, what appears to be a dancing pear with a hat. I approve. Dun, 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 dun. Yes, Nicholas Rocker, you clearly heard about the Megami power plant in the hood. That would be amusing. Sophie Patterson says, I know you don't like to answer current or political questions, so my question is both. How will Brexit and the election affect naval allocations? I have no freaking clue. We only had, well, the election's not even 24 hours old. People are still losing their minds on both sides of the equation on social media. I genuinely have no idea. Ask that question after we've had a Queen's speech, and we might have some vague idea of what's going on. As if we have ever had any vague idea of what's going on in British politics. Edward Kofa, I built a ship using Autodesk. Wow, okay. I use Autodesk at work in my day job. If you built a 3D model of a ship using Autodesk, then my hat is tipped to you, sir, because that is a damned impressive achievement. Yeah. And what the banana? Oh yes, the YouTube chat's done done its usual thing of suddenly making a massive jump. It didn't actually lose the entire place though. So Brent Paulus asks, how good would the US super frigates have fared against a typical fourth rate? Now that's an interesting one. The thing is that there were no typical fourth rates. They were such a weird and inconvenient hybrid class that the fourth rates that were in service around the time that the US super frigates were beginning to be constructed were a little bit all over the shop. So for example, you had kind of the sort of the pocket ship of the line in the shape of something like the Agamemnon, which was of a 64 gunner. Now, if you're going to go up against something like the Agamemnon, I'd probably put my money fairly squarely on that, because the US super frigates are kind of very heavily built large frigates with some aspects of ship of the line design and a fairly brutal close range armament, whereas a 64 gunship like the Agamemnon is a small ship of the line with a fairly brutal long and short range gun armament, and so therefore is likely to have a slight firepower and durability edge. But conversely, there were other sort of 56, 58, 64 gun fourth rates that were considerably more lightly built and considerably less well armed. Sort of main armaments of 24 or even 18 pounders were not unknown on some of those smaller ones. So if you're talking about one of the small, cheap and cheerful fourth rates that were getting a bit long in the tooth, or were budget designs at the time of the US super frigates being initially laid down, as opposed to the War of 1812, by which point they were almost all gone, against those, in a close range engagement, it's entirely possible that a US super frigate would have had a reasonable advantage over them. This is the wonderful thing about the Age of Sail, is that people desperately tried to classify things into various brackets, but there was a huge amount of capability difference within those brackets. Hotho Ploink asks, quick scenario for you to go through. Bismarck and Tirpitz never get built. Instead, Germany builds 2 more Scharnhorsts and upgrades all 4 with 15-inch guns. Well, then Germany has a much more useful fleet, in my opinion. 4 Scharnhorsts, all cruising around. They're fairly well protected. They now have a decent firepower, and assuming that they can keep Scharnhorsting and Eisenhower away from torpedoes and mines long enough for them to be back in service, then the 4 of them combined, or even if it's 2 or 3 of them together with those 15-inch guns, that's going to make a heck of a problem. I mean, people are forever asking what would happen if Tirpitz sailed with Bismarck. Well, actually, if you look at the firepower, Bismarck and Tirpitz together are taking 8 twin turrets, so they're taking 16, 15-inch guns to the fight. Whereas with if you're talking about refitted Scharnhorst Gneisenau, if you take 3 refitted Scharnhorsts to a fight, you're actually bringing an extra 2 15-inch guns, because you've now got 9 of the twin 15-inch turrets on 3 separate targets, which means that, let's say you take 2 King George V's up against Bismarck and Tirpitz, notionally you have something approaching a fight. Not necessarily a fair fight one way or the other, but it's within the kind of the 60-40 one way or the other region, depending on the exact scenario and how you choose to classify things, and also what time period, crucially, depending on who's got what radars and whether they're working. But if you take a similar number of guns and you've got 3 15-inch armed Scharnhorsts, one of them is going to be doing the what Der Flinger did at the Battle of Jutland and going, oh look, no one's firing at me, I guess it's a training day firing exercise. So that means the Royal Navy will have to deploy more ships, and if one of them starts to get beaten down, there's less firepower being knocked out at that one point. So yeah, 4 15-inch armed Scharnhorsts would cause the Royal Navy a lot more trouble than the 2 11-inch Scharnhorst and the Bismarck and Tirpitz historically did, I think. Plus, also, without having in the latter stages of the war Tirpitz as a massive sort of prestige piece that they were loath to risk, you might actually have, even if we assume that the not Bismarck goes out and gets itself sunk in the way that the actual Bismarck did, you'd still have, and even assuming that, let's say, the Gneisenau gets itself crippled the way it did, you'd still have 2 15-inch Scharnhorsts up in Norway instead of Scharnhorst and Tirpitz as original. Battle of the North Cape would look very different if the Royal Navy didn't change its escort patterns in the face of 2 of those sailing out. Paul Mouse asks, if the Rio de Janeiro, the ship that would eventually become Agincourt, had been retained by the Brazilian government, would the British government still have seized it or bought it at the beginning of the First World War? I don't think they would have seized it, because Brazil wasn't in cahoots with Germany. That they very definitely would have still bought it. They probably would have offered Brazil a similar deal to the one that they did with Chile for the Almirante Latorre and the Almirante Cochrane, albeit that, to be perfectly fair, it would be kind of a deal we very strongly encourage you to take, and that you can't do much about if you choose to refuse, as was most British deals that were offered in the imperial period. Rob Rasputin, other cursed names like Graf Spee or Hood. Blücher, I think I've said before, never seems to get any luck when it comes to German ships. Other cursed names. I mean, technically you could say the USS Maine is a cursed name. It's a state. It got itself, its name ship got blown up, and off the top of my head, I don't think they ever got a Dreadnought after that. Or not quite as cursed as Montana, but there you go. The thing is, the US ships tend to be cursed by mainly having their names passed over and thus missing out on naming opportunities. A lot of other people tend to have cursed names because their ships tend to detonate or die in some other similar spectacular fashion. US Navy SEAL Sniper, could we get a brief overview of the Commonwealth navies, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand ships, etc.? Being from New Zealand, I don't know a heap about my own navy other than the Achilles at the River Plate. Sure, that Commonwealth Navy overview, I can do that in a Wednesday special at some point. I'm not going to do that here because that would probably take up the rest of the stream. My intention is to stream until about 9 o'clock UK time, which is currently 8:15 UK time. Hotho Ploink, a man of culture with a fear of heights. Yes, I don't know what it is. As I suspect it's my engineering training. I have a fear of heights. but it seems to be limited to man-made structures. I will quite happily go up to the cliffs of Dover, even though intellectually I understand that that is a suicidally stupid thing to do, and lean over the edge to see what's going on, even though I know it's a crumbling cliff, and I don't have a single twinge of a reaction. But put me on top of a 40-story skyscraper, and all of a sudden I'm rooted to the centre of it, and I don't want to go anywhere near the edge, and it takes a while to work up the nerve. And it didn't used to be that way. When I was a teenager, I was absolutely fine. I can only trace it to my my time doing my civil engineering degree, and I have a suspicion that's because we did so many analysis of various engineering disasters that after a while I started looking at every large man-made structure and going, oh yeah, this was probably built by the lowest bidder and designed by an idiot. I'm not sure I want to be anywhere near it. Might also have something to do with the eternal rivalry between civil engineers and architects, but there you go. Leifur Hakonarsson, just come to Iceland, no mosquitoes. Yes, I've been to Iceland once before. I got some very nice pictures of a very playful humpback whale, a couple of erupting geysers, and then nearly managed to get myself killed climbing up a glacier with having no idea what I was doing. I've got a picture somewhere of the glacier that I took from my little vantage point on what I thought was the ridged opening of a crevasse that was running down the glacier. Had no idea why my dad was frantically yelling and screaming at me to get off the glacier, and then when I came down to the bottom and looked at the photos that he'd been taking, I realised that it wasn't the edge of a crack in the glacier, it was an overhang of ice that was only about half a foot thick over about an 80-foot drop into freezing cold glacier meltwater. But there you go. Was isn't des? Okay. However that's pronounced. A battle between the Bismarck class and a Nelson class battleship 1v1. Who would win? What's your opinion? Snarky answer. The last battle of the Bismarck already answered that one, given that Rodney basically KO'd Bismarck before King George V got any hits in. Slightly more serious answer. It probably comes down to who gets the first hit in, because, well, as all else aside, yes, Bismarck wasn't moving the fastest, and yes, it was doing a little bit of a drunken weave at the time. But at the end of the day, Rodney's first or second hit basically annihilated the Bismarck's ability to fight as a modern battleship, taking out the bridge, taking out the central fire control station, and leaving the fore and aft turrets under local control. At that point, Bismarck's ability to effectively reply to incoming fire was massively decreased, and it was just a matter of time. Now, in theory, you could say the Bismarck might be able to pull that off on Rodney, which, yes, is fair enough. It very well might be able to. But that's why I say it's going to come down to who gets the first major set of hits in, and Rodney has the slight advantage with that all-forward mounted main battery that it can do what it historically did and sort of come in at a slightly more acute angle than most other battleships were able to. And of course it also depends on the captains. The captain of the Rodney literally did a steer for the last salvo thing, which managed to keep him clear of the period that Bismarck was firing actually relatively accurately. Magazog asks, how do you British go from ruling the world to not owning any guns? Yeah, I'm not 100 years old. But I have a feeling it's probably something to do with trying to fight 2 world wars start to finish, and giving the United States all our money. That probably helped. Oh dear. You do realise we only finished paying off the US for our war debt in like the 2000s. World wars are expensive. Who knew? Sean Courtney asks, if the Taiho had come under air attack rather than being torpedoed by a submarine, do you think she would have fared better than other IJN carriers? Given that other IJN carriers, when they got dive-bombed, tended to explode into gigantic fireballs that kept burning for an unseemly long period of time, it's difficult to imagine how it could have done worse. Although it also got in on the whole massive explosion act after it got hit by the torpedo. But with its armoured deck, yeah, it probably would have done. Its armoured deck is similar in many ways to the British armoured decks, armoured deck carriers. And if you look at how the British armoured deck carriers fared when they were hit by 1,000-pound bombs from dive bombers, well, for one thing, you don't see any British carriers going up in massive fireballs, although a lot of that is to do with damage control and layout of the ship, and Taiho, in that respect, as covered in the video on Taiho, was not perhaps the best well-designed of ships. But yeah, if it had come under air attack and maybe taking a couple of 1,000-pounder bomb hits, the armoured hangar would either have protected it, or at least ensured that the bombs detonated high in the ship, high in the hangar, depending on how fast the bombs hit, what angle they were dropped from, etc. And then assuming that those don't break any sort of gasoline mains or anything, then yeah, it probably would have survived, which is a lot more than could be said for something like Kaga or Akagi. Robert Boffey asks, if you were told you're being taken back in time to serve on a warship, but you had the choice of the era and type of ship, which would you choose? My first instinct would be to cheat and say something like the Queen Elizabeth or the Prince of Wales, one of the new carriers, like 3 or 4 days ago when Prince of Wales was having its commissioning, because then I might be able to make some money on this week's lottery numbers. But that's that's just me being a cynical, rules abusing little individuals. But if to take the spirit of your question, I think I've said before, probably something like USS Massachusetts, something nice and big that was involved in a lot of shooting, but that I know historically managed not to lose anybody. Who keeps blowing their nose on in the background? That is the mine. The mine is having a not so good a day with colds and such. Nick Walters says, I read Herbert Werner's U-boat autobiography Iron Coffins and was surprised at how much they avoided wasting, quote-unquote, a torpedo on escorts. Is that always the case? Seems killing the escort would be a priority. Yes and no. Killing an escort for a convoy would seem to be a good way of getting into the convoy. The main problem is that convoys don't usually have just the one escort, and if you blow one of them up, you can guarantee all the rest of them are going to show up and be very, very angry with you. Plus, you've got the problem that if you fire a torpedo at a merchant ship, chances are that unless they've got a particularly sharp lookout, they're not going to know it's coming until there's a massive explosion. Whereas escorts, which would be running hydrophones and sonar, they might well hear that torpedo coming, which suddenly makes the chances of you hitting them much, much less, because they're going to go full speed and try and evade, at which point you've just told the escort exactly where you are, and they're going to be coming after you with a vengeance. So yeah, when he says wasting a torpedo on the escorts, he's probably more referring to the fact that the chances of actually hitting the blasted thing is relatively slim, and even if you did manage to, you're going to end up with a lot of angry escorts on top of you, so it's not a good idea. It's better to just hope the thing goes away, and then, or you can sneak past them and get into the convoy. Iron Gamer asks, will there be a battle breakdown for the sinking of HMS Glorious? Yep, at some point. Most of these battles are are going to be reviewed at some point. It's just a matter of when. As I say, there's such a long list for that. The Action off Lofoten is another one I want to do. HMS Renown versus Sharnors and Gneisenau. The main thing that's holding me back from doing that at the moment is I'm trying to find some form of royalty-free music that vaguely matches the Maelstrom battle from Pirates of the Caribbean 3, because that is such an appropriate bit of music, but I don't want to get Disney coming after me for using the original track. Intercity 125 is back asking if you had to choose from an armoured paddle steamer or a converted aristocratic yacht. Oh boy. Well, if we're talking about them both ships being from the period where an armoured paddle steamer would even be possible, I'd go with the armoured paddle steamer, because I might lose my propulsion, but an armoured paddle steamer is likely to also have sails, so there's a vague chance I might actually get out of there. And I'm armoured, so other parts of my ship might not be quite so vulnerable, whereas a converted aristocratic yacht is just a very fancy floating coffin. Casey the Fifth asks, you touched on the Anglo-Dutch War. Is the plan on going deeper into that conflict? Well, which one? There's like 4 or 5 of them. As a Dutchman myself, I enjoy reminding the English that we are the reason they built the empire. Yes, the Anglo-Dutch War, I do plan on going into more detail at some point. I have a very nice thick tome on the 4 days battle that I'm gradually working my way through. So at some point that will be a Wednesday special. But I have a feeling I'm probably going to be looking at it through the lens of looking at some of the bigger and more important individual battles, with surrounding commentary on the war that they were being fought in, rather than trying to give a pocket history of one of the Anglo-Dutch wars in under an hour, because that this is the problem with sometimes with doing the Wednesday specials, is that if you're trying to cover something that's either massively complex or incredibly long in terms of time, such as actually earlier this week with the Enigma video, which definitely falls into the massively complex period and also covers about 15 to 20 years, there's so much you've got to cut out without running on and on and on and on and on, that you end up missing a few bits. And okay, fair enough, at the end of the day, all of these reviews and videos are designed to stimulate interest in naval history, so there is always going to be stuff that's left out for people to go and find out. But there's a certain level of making sure the key and important details are in there. And if just keeping those key and important details in suddenly means you're still looking at 3 to 4 hour scripts, yeah, it's probably not the appropriate format. Not unless the BBC or somebody wants to commission me to do a mini-series on something of that scale. Jacob Smith, I kind of want to see what Team Drac looked like. You probably don't. I think the only photograph that actually had me in it, because I was behind the camera most of the time when I was in Iceland, is me looking a little bit like a Michelin man, only wearing black and grey thermal insulating clothing, because Iceland's cold. Zigzag Ground Zero, did sailors really fish from World War II warships like seen in the movies? Not often, because the ships were generally moving far too fast for that, and to be perfectly honest, if a ship's moving at sea in wartime, you got a job to do. If you magically find yourself with enough time to go fishing off of the aft of the ship, there's going to be an officer wanting to know what particular duty you skipped on to do that. So yeah, they did do fishing and such when they were in port, because why not? At that point they did have some time. They also did all sorts of other weird and wonderful things, like water polo matches and the water-based version of small race courses with obstacles and archways to pass through and everything, which is always quite funny. In this big batch of photos that I'm currently in the process of trying to make public domain, there's a few photos of some Royal Navy sailors basically doing the sort of an 800-metre swimming obstacle course in Malta's Grand Harbour. They certainly had some time to pass, I guess. Sam Easley asks, how do you think HMS Agincourt would have fared if she had been put in a smaller fleet or individual ship engagement, given her large number of guns at a smaller calibre? In the World War I period, depends entirely who she's fighting. In a small-scale fleet action, let's say battle squadron versus battle squadron, I wouldn't want to be on that ship, to be perfectly honest. Agincourt is legendary for its sheer number of guns, but it also has equivalent side armour protection to the average Lion-class battle cruiser. That's not necessarily as bad as the memes make it out to be, but it's still not fantastic. The Lion-class belt armour actually did a reasonably good job standing up to the 11-inch gunfire of most of the German battle cruisers, certainly. But when you're talking about the German battleships with 12-inch and obviously later on once Bayern and Barton are in service 15-inch guns, I don't really want to be going up against that with a 9-inch belt. Although the large number of guns was comical to observe. Carrick, speak of the devil, was that the Averof just a moment ago? Yes, on the slideshow, Averof was at the Spithead Naval Review. I think there's about 3 photos of it in that slideshow somewhere. Yorkie KDS, why do you think Thomas Cochrane is not widely known about, and what would you say is his greatest achievement? Probably because, as brilliant as he was, he had the misfortune to exist around the same time as Nelson, and he was relatively well celebrated at the time, but Nelson's achievements, for reasonably understandable reasons, just ended up overshadowing almost everybody else from that era in the general public consciousness. Although in places like Chile, obviously, he's much better known. What would you say his greatest achievement is? I rather like him taking on a full-on Spanish frigate in what's effectively a glorified sailboat and winning. When your ship is so small, you can literally sail under the enemy's guns to the point they can't depress them low enough to fire on you. You know you're massively outmatched, and then you turn around and go, aha, and now I'm boarding you. Marty Boost, Portsmouth Dockyard wiki page is only 1 paragraph. Well, that's because whoever wrote that wiki page was an idiot. What else have we got? Oh, for flip's sake. Sorry, the chat, the YouTube just decided it was going to go and do another massive jump. Where the... Yep. Oh my goodness. How far was this jump? Okay. James Lancaster. Why is that happening? Oh right, my Do Not Disturb switched itself off for no reason. Go away, Wish. I do not wish to buy your cheap Chinese-made rubbish. James Lancaster asks, it would be funny if it was the James Lancaster, but I rather suspect not. I read once a report, possibly American, that looked at the British battlecruiser explosions at Jutland and concluded that the design of the UK charges compared... I'm trying to pass that. I think what you mean to say is concluded that with the design of the UK charges, the same hits wouldn't have caused the same explosion in German or US ships. Yes and no. US ships, this is the weird thing. So everyone was using slightly different propellant. The US propellant was the least likely to randomly combust. The German was sort of in the middle, and the UK was the most likely to combust. And then when it came to the actual storage of the charges, the Germans stored them in brass casings after the lesson of Seydlitz at Dogger Bank, and the US and the UK used the silk bags with much less durable casings. So it was kind of it's a mix and match. If you sort of score them on a scale of sort of a 1 to 3, or good, indifferent, and bad, the British had the misfortune of having the most explosive charges and not particularly durable way of storing the charges. The Americans were just as bad at storing the charges in a lot of cases, but that's in terms of their casings. Not that the Americans weren't addicted to storing them all over the turrets, but let's say the American propellant was much less likely to flash over than British early World War I cordite, and then the Germans had charges that were actually more combustible than the American ones, but they kept them in brass cases after very especially after Dogger Bank, and so they were actually the least vulnerable to flash. So it would have depended. I mean, Seydlitz, obviously at Dogger Bank, its charges burning out very nearly destroyed the ship in a very similar manner to how the British lost their battlecruisers at Jutland, and a number of the German turrets did catch fire and burn out, again in a similar manner, but their magazines didn't detonate, in part because of these better procedures at storing their charges. The Americans, in theory, their charges should not have ignited quite as readily as the British or German ones did, but that was never tested out, so it's not entirely possible to tell precisely. I mean, after all, the British did do tests to see what would happen if a bunch of cordite charges caught fire, and the test showed they'd just burn out and wouldn't cause the ship to blow up, and obviously that turned out to be a bit of a mistake, so wouldn't necessarily pin all my hopes on just pure experimental testing. Colinsdad 1, any thoughts on the ongoing nightmare that is the USS Puerto Rico debacle? I haven't paid that much attention to it, to be perfectly honest, because the last couple of days and today as well, I've actually been not particularly well. I've been off from work most of this week because I managed to near the beginning of the week I managed to slip on some oily, damp footway and smack my head hard enough to knock myself out. So the doctors are being very careful, and I'm on a lot of medication, which I think may be part of the reason it's affecting my voice. But hey, I'm sitting at home and slowly recovering. So anyway, that's why I haven't been paying much attention to the Puerto Rico debacle, but I understand vaguely it's something along the lines of Wargaming introducing something that in theory you can build, but in practice you have a very short time to actually do so, and if you want to boost your way through to actually getting it, you're going to have to pay stupid amounts of gold. I did have a look at the port thing that it's introduced in earlier today when I was playing some World of Warships. Took one look at the amount of gold on the boosters and just went, nope, forget about that. And that was that. So further thoughts, apart from it seems like a massive cash grab that is incredibly badly thought out, would have to wait for further analysis. I do have a couple of videos from Jingles and Flamu queued up to watch at some point when I've got some spare time, which promise to be rather amusing. Colin's Deadwood also says, greetings from Massachusetts, looking forward to your trip here in April. So am I, actually. I'm definitely looking forward to that trip. I've been to America twice before, and those of you who stay in your country seem to be an awful lot more level-headed and sane than some of the tourists you export overseas. I'll just say that. Although there was a rather interesting incident last time I was in... no, was it last time? Either the last time or the time before that, when I was in New York, and we had a very entertaining 10-minute discussion with a stationery shop owner trying to explain that we wanted sellotape. And he had absolutely no idea what we were talking about and thought we were all crazy. He wasn't necessarily wrong, but it was nothing. That's nothing to do with the sellotape issue. It eventually turns out that it's actually what you Americans, or at least New Yorkers, call Scotch tape, which I'd never heard of. But there you go. Okay, let's have a look through some more. Some of these questions are repeating themselves. I don't know if it's people repeating them or YouTube just deciding they're going to show me the questions again. Answered that one. Chris G asks, what if Germany was able to keep some, let's say 3, of their 12-inch gun dreadnoughts of the High Seas Fleet post-war? How would this have affected World War II, with the Kriegsmarine having somewhat disposable battleships? Well, for one thing, you probably wouldn't have seen the Deutschlands, because the Deutschlands were ostensibly 10,000-ton replacements for some of the 11-inch pre-dreadnoughts that Germany was allowed to keep, but that they then disposed of in the 1920s. If they're going to be keeping 12-inch gun dreadnoughts, let's just say 3 Kaiser class for the sake of argument, they're not going to be disposing of them in the 20s unless, well, their economy does go to absolute pieces, but let's assume that they still keep them around. I mean, they kept Schlesien and Schleswig-Holstein around, so they probably get modernised. And yeah, then we'd have an interesting situation, because Germany's capital ship fleet, albeit that the Kaisers would be slower, would in theory be a lot more powerful, but you wouldn't have the Battle of the River Plate, because there's no way they'd send a Kaiser class out to try and do what Graf Spee was doing. That would actually that's actually a really interesting alternate scenario, because the thing is, you wouldn't send them out commerce raiding because of the speed. They'd be too easy to catch. They'd actually have to operate as a kind of full-on battle group. So you probably see them in the invasion of Norway, for one. And then probably to be honest, probably stuck up in Norway for most of the war. But they'd certainly be a lot more worrying for the Allies for the Arctic convoys as a result of that. I'd have to give a lot more thought about that. Unless they let them keep Derflinger and Hindenburg, that would give them a lot more freedom of action. But then they're battle cruisers. Gordon Collins, what is a stripped turbine, as in what happened to Hood at Mers El Kabir when giving chase to Strasbourg? It's a phrase you do not want to hear if you're part of a naval engineering crew, but basically a stripped turbine, usually speaking, okay, what's the best way of describing it? Okay, so imagine those many bladed disc shaped wind turbine fans that you sometimes see that have a very big centerpiece. The drive part of a turbine is kind of like that, only there are even more blades and they're even shorter, and the central disk space is even larger, generally speaking. When a turbine is stripped, what tends to happen is one or more of those blades break, and then as they break, they fly around and all the others break, and then you have bits of hardened steel running into the delicate inner workings of the engine, and then everything goes horribly, horribly wrong, and there's lots of clanking and banging and small explosions, and people start panicking because they're a couple of steps away from something even going even worse. And the reason it's called stripping the turbine is by the time you open up the casing, you basically have a turbine core and lots of shrapnel that's sliced everything else to pieces. An alternate way of thinking about it would be watching a commercial jet engine suck in debris when it's going at maximum speed. Only now imagine that happening in an enclosed environment inside a ship. It's not a precise analogy because the blade setup and all that is somewhat different, but yeah, not a good thing. You're basically stuffed at that point in terms of maintaining full speed, because once you've stripped a turbine, you ain't repairing that at sea. That's a major dockyard job. Willie Jimmy, do you prefer the UK becoming a colony of the USA or a colony of the new Ottoman Empire from a naval historian's point of view? I don't like being a galley slave, so I'll pass on the Ottoman one, thank you. Warwick at 49 points out with Puerto Rico. If you buy the whole thing, it's a total of 58,000 doubloons. If it's that much, then forget it. I didn't even bother adding up the 3 boosters, but 58,000 doubloons is just no. Getting me the shivers even thinking about that, putting that much into esoteric in-game currency. Mind you, that said, I did spend an ungodly amount of money getting a 3D print of my favourite ship in Star Trek Online, so who am I to talk? But at least that's a physical object that I can throw at somebody if I need to. Whenever Michael Denisic asks, whenever I see a documentary that states the Bismarck was the most powerful warship at that stage of the war, was that an accurate statement? No. By the time Bismarck comes into service, there are a number of ships that can either give it a straight up fight or would be superior to it. So we've already gone over the Nelson class. There's obviously the King George V's. They're capable of giving it a straight fight, at least. Then you've got the Littorios coming in just a fraction later than the Bismarcks, and the Richelieus as well. Bismarck itself commissioning slightly earlier than most of them, but they're still of a time period, and you can definitely make an argument that had they ever fixed their issues with the shells, the actual as ships themselves, the Littorios were more powerful. The Colorados are somewhat better protected, and their guns, well, in the upgraded form, a Colorado could probably give a Bismarck a decent fight, albeit the Bismarck would have a ridiculous speed advantage, so it can dictate whether or not it wants to have that fight in the first place. You've got the North Carolinas coming online. They can also give the Bismarck a pretty decent straight fight, and they've got more guns and 16-inch instead of 15. So, yeah. And actually, to be honest, by the time Bismarck's coming into service, although people don't in the West don't realise it, the Yamato is nearly complete. So, yeah. I mean, Bismarck's big and it's pretty powerful. So let's not dunk on the Bismarck overly enthusiastically. It was a pretty powerful, if inefficient, warship design, but it's one of those things where you can point to all sorts of factors and it's like, what makes a ship the most powerful? Is it speed? Is it firepower? Is it armour? It should be a combination of all three, and which one do you rate the most? You can make all sorts of arguments one way or another on that. The whole sort of terror ship Bismarck thing is, in a way, it's actually a legacy of Western propaganda, well, the Western Allies propaganda about the ships at the time. But yeah, I don't think it was ever a particularly accurate statement. It was certainly, for the time, until you had things like the South Dakotas and the Iowas and Vanguard rocking up, it was certainly one of the more powerful ships, albeit, as I say, inefficient. But saying it's the most powerful is just that. No, that's not right. MVFC-76 says, why were the Luftwaffe so ineffective at sinking Royal Navy capital ships in World War II, despite having air superiority in locations such as Malta, etc., whilst the Japanese sank 2 British capital ships in one afternoon? I wouldn't necessarily say the Luftwaffe were completely ineffective at sinking Royal Navy capital ships. I mean, fair enough, they didn't manage to put any of them down by air attack alone, but they did manage to sink quite a number of other British warships. And they certainly got a fair number of hits in on British capital ships. The main things were that, well, you can put them into a number of categories. One is that British ships in the areas that German aircraft were able to attack them generally were considerably better defended than Force Z was. They had more escorts, so there was more AA firepower generally. Due to their not being in the tropics, the various anti-aircraft fire control systems and the radar, etc., actually worked, which it didn't because of the tropical heat, which it wasn't used to in the Force Z battle, which massively hampered their ability to fight. And the same thing with the ammunition falling apart for the pom-poms was largely due to the tropical heat, which is not necessarily a problem in the North Sea, or even the Mediterranean for that matter. And there was generally also some degree of air cover, whether that be from carriers or land-based fighters, depending on whereabouts you were in the overall European operating theatre. Plus, although the Germans did obviously have lots of dive bombers, the number of units they had specifically trained for anti-shipping work was relatively small. So, although it's not an excuse for the loss of Force Z, the Japanese attack was something of a perfect storm, in as much as that they caught the Repulsor and the Prince of Wales without air cover, without any kind of serious anti-aircraft escort, and where their own ammunition and anti-aircraft guns were not working anywhere near as well as they should have done at the time. If that, even without the escorts and the air cover, if that same attack had gone off in the Mediterranean or the North Sea, if we magically transplanted the Japanese over there, it probably would have been a relatively different story, because most of the AA guns might actually have worked for a change. But there you go. Yeah. At some point I shall have to do a special on Force Z that goes into all the various things that went wrong, both in terms of British assessments of the Japanese, because they did badly miscalculate what the Japanese were capable of, but also in terms of the actual technical failures as a result of the tropical weather, which they hadn't actually configured the ships properly for. Veldonwin asks, were there any other local naval arms races akin to the South American Dreadnought race? Well, there was an arms race between Argentina and Chile before the South American Dreadnought race. In the late 1800s, there was a naval arms race between Japan and China. And at various points off and on in the Mediterranean, there were various localized arms races between France and Italy, the last of which gave us the Richelieus, the Littorios, the refitted Italian World War I dreadnoughts, and the Dunkirks. Old Contemptible, what are you drinking? I was drinking Cherry Pepsi Max, but I've run out. So coming up to 9 o'clock, so I'm going to probably have to start wrapping it up. Partly because I'm going to start losing my voice, and partly because, well, I need to do things like such as prepare more material for videos and sleep and everything. Oh, by the way, if anybody has a copy of the book Warship 2006 or Warship 2008, I will quite happily purchase it off you for a reasonable price, because I can't find them at anything other than Amazon bot cranked ridiculous prices for love nor money, and I've got almost every, well, I actually do have every other one of that series, but that's just an aside. Michael Rashke asks, Age of Sail duel between similar frigates, would you rather a larger gun count or better sailing ability? Depends how big a difference it is, because if you've got a larger gun count, if you're maybe 4, 6, 8 guns more, but you've got the same number of guns, then I'd definitely go with a better sailing ability, because that'll let me get into a position to rake, at which point you having a few more guns isn't going to matter, because half your guns are going to be dismounted and the crew's dead in a few seconds. Whereas if it's sort of 10, 20 gun margin, then obviously you want the larger gun count, because at that point, yeah, fire quantity has a quality all of its own. But yeah, if it's similar frigates with similar armament and the choice is a few more guns or the ability to sail considerably better, I'd go with the better sailing ability every day, because that's going to give me the ability to decline the combat if I want, and it's going to give me a far better chance to get in the initial raking broadsides that are so vital in single ship duels. Colonel Green, would the Dunkirk-class ships have been capable of dealing with the Deutschlands? Yeah, that's what they were designed to do. And then the Germans built the Scharnhorsts. So, but yeah, in terms of dealing with the Deutschlands, a Dunkirk-class could quite happily deal with that. They've got the armour to resist the Deutschland's guns. They've got the firepower to put down the Deutschlands, and they've got the speed to catch them. I mean, this is one of the things that's been said before with the Deutschlands, is that they were designed to outfight anything they couldn't outrun and outrun anything they couldn't outfight. Well, except for Renown, Repulse and Hood, but also append to that Dunkirk and Strasbourg. Warrior Cat 49. For some reason, there's a difference when the structure you're in isn't attached to the ground. This is referring to my fear of man-made heights. Yeah, I agree. Because, yeah, once I'm in a plane, I just look out the window and it's like, yeah, it's fine. Maybe it's the fatalism in me. Maybe there's something in me that just goes, well, I'm looking at this. If something goes wrong with this thing, there's not a lot I can do about it. Yeah, so to answer TCV6's question, no, I'm not actually scared from going on an airplane. In fact, I prefer the window seat, because you get some pretty cool views. Christopher Abernathy, Averof versus Scharnhorst armoured cruisers. Putting them up against both is a bit unfair. One-on-one, and the Averof probably has a pretty decent chance of besting a single Scharnhorst. 2-on-1, the Scharnhorst are going to take that quite easily. David Connor, many recent US shipyard fires. Any other shipyard man-made disasters? The British once managed to drop a battleship, specifically HMS Valiant. They put it in a dry dock. I think, if I remember correctly, it was a floating dry dock, but they didn't prop it correctly, and so it fell off. And yeah, dropping a 30,000-ton battleship doesn't do good things to anything, dock or battleship. Bum. Grapho, in your opinion, which class of fleet carrier was the most capable at the beginning of World War II, considering any nation? Oh, that's a controversial one, is it? It's not something you can easily answer, because in terms of the best that any nation had to offer, well, you only really had three nations that were putting out full fleet carriers. So you had the Ark Royal and Illustrious in the UK, you had the Yorktowns in the US, and the Shikakus were the pinnacle of Japanese design. You can actually make a fairly legitimate argument that the Shikakus were probably the most capable fleet carrier design at the beginning of World War II. But obviously there's a difference between the capability of the ship itself and the use and employment of it. So, for example, the Illustriouses were massively more survivable than either the Yorktown or Shikaku class, but had massively reduced air groups by comparison, which meant their offensive firepower was considerably less. Whereas Yorktown and Shikaku could put out similar numbers of strike aircraft, but they were more vulnerable to air attack. So, yeah, I'd have to get into a breakdown of that. So I think which class fleet carrier was most capable? It depends on what you're going to be using it for. Really, what's your main operational environment? Boom, boom, boom. Audio's Reality, weird and wonderful steering and propulsion test beds. Are we going to ever see anything about it? Yep, again, it's on a very long list. It's on a very long list of Wednesday specials. Then what have we got? So 2103. Okay, so I'm going to take 5 more questions at random from the list, and then I'll consider wrapping it up. Either that or my voice will give out, one way or the other. Thomas Bernecki, looking forward to seeing you in Philadelphia in April, perhaps on New Jersey or Olympia. Yep, sure. As I say, unfortunately I wasn't quite able to sort out the schedule to be published in detail for this weekend, although I really wanted to. I'm just having a couple of issues with the Holiday Inn chain in America at the minute. I booked once and they took the booking twice, gave me 2 separate reference numbers, and then refused to give me a refund on the second booking. So I'm having a bit of an argument with them at the minute, and I don't want to make any further bookings with them for the nights that I need to until I've sorted that out. So hopefully I'll resolve that this week, and we'll be able to tell everyone about that there. But yes, New Jersey and Olympia, if people can find me on that, that's fine. But what I will also be doing is on the evenings that I'm going to be in the States, and not dashing for an airport, I will mark those and possibly even mark a sort of a base of operations, probably a decent diner or restaurant, because I'll need some carbs. Church Tucker, would it kill you to detour from Philly to Baltimore? Probably, given the schedule that I'm on. Baltimore is on my list of things to do for my second trip to the States, whether that's towards the end of next year or the beginning of the year after. But there's only so many places I can visit in 2 weeks. Ashir, is it true that documents regarding Glorious's demise are still declared as top secret by the Admiralty? No idea offhand. Most of the records from that period, let's see, Glorious was lost in 1940, so that puts us 60, 70, coming up to 80 years. Most of the documents related to Glorious's loss should have been released. If there was anything particularly sensitive, it might still be stuck under the 90-year rule, which gives us another 11 years till it goes public, but I can't imagine there'd be that much. I'd have to check with the Q archives. But then if they're top secret, they wouldn't tell me, but I could probably work it out from the gaps missing in the records. That's something I'll have to go off and find somewhere. Speedy CMS, where do you get all your photos? Good question. Sometimes even I don't know. So some photos are ones that I've had forever and a day. I've been collecting photos of various ships and filing them away on a voluminous set of hard drives for years. So some of them are just ones that I have, and I have no idea where they came from anymore. Others are ones that I go looking for actively if I need to make a particular point in a particular video. And still others, like the one that's running around on the slideshow at the moment, are from photos that have come up for sale and that I've bought to try and keep them in the public domain. Because as I say, once I've finished up scanning this large batch, and going to send those off to the Dreadnought project for public use, because I don't like seeing photos like that disappear off of out of public domain. I've got no particular interest in charging anyone for them, so people are free to use them as long as they don't try and make money off of them, because they did cost a fair bit for me to acquire. If you want to use them in videos and stuff, that's absolutely no problem, but if I see someone like Getty Images or whatever, I'm not getting, what's the Alamy or whatever, trying to stick their copyright on them, I will find some way to find them and teach them about my certain set of skills, possibly using some of my medieval reenactment equipment. Chris, right, no, I haven't seen Midway yet. We're down to 2 more full-on questions before I need to go offline. Thanks, Bill. That's Bill Cunningham saying, good on you for your stance on pictures. Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, if everyone had the idea of, oh, these are my photos, no one else can have access to them, my videos would be very boring, because my hand-drawn artistic skills are not brilliant. So yeah, it is what it is. There's some very interesting photos, actually, I've got coming up to release. Gareth Sewell, is there any chance of a visit and special on HMS Trincomalee? Yeah, at some point. The thing with the where there are ships or remains of ships that still exist is I don't tend to want to do guides to them just sort of based from home and research there. If a ship exists, I will, if I can, visit it and do an extended guide to it while I'm there. Blue Jacket Warrior, what is the silliest anti-submarine warfare measure you've run across? On the flip side, what anti-submarine warfare weapons have been developed that you scream, why didn't you build this? Silliest anti-submarine warfare method I've come across probably has to go to the pre-World War I British idea of sending men out with boats and small hammers to break the periscope lenses of submarines. At some point I should probably do a limited edition merch run that just consists of a small one-handed hammer in a presentation box with detailed instructions on what to do if you've come across a U-boat. It'd be the anti-submarine hammer kit or something. Oh, I'll have to put those together. They should be fairly amusing. Maybe I can have even a range of small hammers for different size U-boat periscopes. It's like, Perkins, give me the number 4 hammer. This is a UC type. In terms of screaming, why didn't you build this? Not sure if it's technically an anti-submarine warfare weapon, but in that vein of things, I have sometimes pondered as to, given the fact that the Germans had acoustic homing torpedoes by the end of World War II, and they also had radio-guided missiles like the HS-293, why they didn't marry the two together, kind of like the Akara in the Akara missile that was developed in the Cold War era, and have basically a missile that would then drop off a homing torpedo, because that would be much harder to shoot down, much harder to evade, and probably do a lot more damage than just a straight up HS-293. But there's probably some technical reason why they didn't do it, but I do wonder why they didn't. Robert Boffey, okay, so we've got one more serious question to do before I need to go to bed. Robert Boffey says, if you were forced to start a spin-off YouTube channel covering something other than naval history, so this is the non-serious question, what would it be? Probably something like the 5-minute guides, but for probably something like Warhammer 40k ships. Or maybe I'd just get full on stuck into medieval history for my reenactment stuff. At some point I will be producing a bunch of videos for my reenactment club and stuff, doing medieval history and such, but that's going to be on their YouTube channel. And that's mainly just for my own amusement and edification. If I had the money, I'd probably go out and do an absolute full-on series of comprehensive longbow versus armor tests. So let's get our one last serious question. Apologies to those of you whose questions I haven't been able to answer, but unfortunately you asked them faster than I can answer them, and if I kept going, we'd be here all night, and in about 15 to 20 minutes there'd just be a horse croaking coming from somewhere at this end of the microphone. Oh, a quick one. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that because it's all in Cyrillic, but whoever asked any chance to shed light on the actions of the British fleet in northern Russia during 1918-19, I did actually do a video on that. It's called On the Baltic War. I think it's called A Story of Fire and Ice, but mostly ice, so give that a search. I cover that for a bit. That's a little bit of a collab I did with Great War Channel. Oh, right, there's the start of my voice going. That's one more question. Let's make it a good one. Oh, I say that and then it just jumps massively. Svarthanska, yeah, I know about the Todd stuff video. I've seen it. I actually know Will Sherman, and he actually made most of my longbow arrows, my heavy warbow arrows, and made 2 of my warbows as well. I have 5 of the blasted things. So yeah, I've seen that, but as I say, it's a single point test against a single armor type. There's a lot more to go into, but I'm not going to go into medieval reenactment history on a naval channel stream. Yeah, sorry, YouTube just went, oh yeah, here, have a random different set of questions. So I was halfway through searching through another list, now I'm looking for one last question in a completely different section. Cesium Dem, would you consider hosting your pictures for anyone interested? As I say, I will be hosting them on the Dreadnought project, so I'll let you know once those, or they'll be hosting them for me, I guess, so I'll let you know when they're ready, when it's all uploaded and ready. I just need to find a decent quality scanner, because it turns out mine isn't. Um, Okay, well, there appeared to be a random Second Amendment debate going on at this stage of the thread of the chat that YouTube has decided to show me. So there's a lot to skip over there. Um, okay, so oh, it's just moving all over the place now. Okay, well, let's go with this one because this will be a nice one to end it on. Animal 16365 asks, if you could arrest and put in jail before their actions, who would you arrest? Beatty-Seymour or Admiral Jean Saul? Admiral Beatty and Seymour without a moment's hesitation. Much as I rag on Admiral Jean Saul, and I think justifiably so, at the end of the day, well, I did have a chat with a few other people who disagreed with some of my points on the Moselle Kabir video. That, in and of itself, is another video that will be coming in the new year, once I've edited it into a reasonable format. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, when you put the two up against each other, although Admiral Jean Saul, in my opinion, made a number of very wrong calls, harsh as it might sound, he quote-unquote only managed to get about 1,300 of his countrymen killed. With their massive levels of incompetence, Beatty and Seymour managed to get something like three to four times that many killed at Jutland, with 3 battle cruisers that exploded and the other ships that ended up going to the bottom, and through their, as well as the ships that got damaged, and as well as that, thanks to their general incompetence in signalling and command, they not only missed out on the opportunity at Dogger Bank to take out more of the German battle cruisers, which would again have influenced Jutland more in Britain's favour, but also through his sheer lack of communication, not only with his own fleet but with Jellicoe. Beatty managed to almost ruin Jellicoe's chances of deploying at all, and in the event, and the Grand Fleet had to make the best of a bad situation, which then ended up with well, let's face it, a non-optimal outcome at Jutland. If Beatty had done his job better, I mean, if he'd done his job better at Jutland period, then the sort of 3,000 to 4,000 men who died on the battle cruisers because of him in large part wouldn't have died, which is a significantly higher body count than Jean Saul managed to rack up. But also, even failing that, even if we ignore that and say, well, Beatty is, if we just let the whole ammunition situation go, if Beatty had at least done his job of communicating what the heck was happening to Jellicoe, his job, then Jellicoe might have been able to put a lot more hurt in on the High Seas Fleet, which may then have had significant knock-on effects further down the line in terms of the overall outcome of the war. So yeah, I think if I was going to throw one or the other in prison, it would have to be BT Seymour by a long way. Even if strategic concerns aside, just purely on the level of lives that could be saved. As I said to other people with the Midway movie, I haven't seen it yet. When it comes out on DVD, I'll have a look. I'll have a check out. Right. So now it's 21:21, so it's 21 minutes after I said I was supposed to be heading off, but now I actually am, because I'm just about keeping my voice going. So thank you very much, everybody. Very sorry to those of you who haven't been able to get their questions answered. I guess maybe we'll have to do that. We will have to do this another time, and I will publish, as I said before, for the people who were around at the beginning, and there was the massive minefield. I will go through this live stream once the video has processed, and I will grab I'll go and grab somebody, the 5 winners for the keys for Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. Oh, and right, okay, other than that, see you all another time.